So, hello and welcome back to another evening with our wonderful, amazing brain ship, Tia, and her fantastic partner, Alex. I hope everybody is doing good today. I actually had a really good day. Like, really, really, really good. It was, we went to town, which, that's whatever. But it was a gorgeous, just like sunny, absolutely beautiful day. And so that made me feel better. And because there is the possibility of snow again tomorrow, big surprise, it is still winter after all. When I got home, I looked at the roads and I was like, you know what? I think they're walkable today. So, because we had gotten just enough snow that there was just enough snow over the ice to give it a good grip. So I was like, you know what? It's sunny, it's warm, and warm is relative. It was actually only 32 degrees, which is 0 on the Celsius scale. But you know what? When it's 32 and bright sunshine and almost no wind, 32 can feel pretty darn good. In fact, by the end of my walk, I was kind of like, why am I wearing a coat? I'm glad I was, because, not wearing a coat is a really good way to end up getting yourself sick. But, I did at least contemplate not wearing a coat or wishing I hadn't worn a coat. And I don't think I zipped my coat the entire walk. It was a really nice day. And it's one of those things that it's like, yeah, I need to do this more often, but it's really hard to do when every other step you're sliding. So I was really happy. I only slipped once and I didn't fall. So yay for not falling, because falling sucks. And it was a good walk. Also, at the beginning, and I did take a video which would have been up yesterday for you watching this, because I record these a full day in advance. So it would have been up yesterday, because today is Saturday. The walk video will go up Sunday. Oh, I guess I'm actually a day and a half ahead on books. Yay me. I'm kind of proud of myself. But yeah, the video that went up Sunday was of my walk and my random babblings that I do as I'm walking along thinking, what should I say? I don't usually talk on walks. So don't mind me. It's usually just whatever random stuff is floating through my head at the time. It will be what I talk about while I'm walking. And I think what I talked about while I was walking this time was how good the sun felt and kicking ice. Yeah, I know I talked about kicking ice and slipping. And at the beginning of that video, my son got a little bit of me going down to feed the swans, which we've been regularly having 6 of them, and one of last year's babies, you can tell the babies from the adults because the babies are kind of a grayish color still. One of the babies has finally figured out that if he stands semi-close to me, he can get corn all to himself, and the adults will leave him alone, because the adults are bullies. I love my swans, but they're bullies. And the adults will peck at the young ones and try to chase them away from the food, and they're just terrible, mean, awful bullies who probably belong in the book Blubber, which is the other book we're reading right now. But none of that has anything to do with the book that we are currently about to read, other than the fact that I'm just babbling because I'm babbling. Anyway, if you remember in the first part of this chapter, which is what, chapter 5? What chapter are we on? That's a really good question. I think this is chapter 5, but darn it, my brain just glitched and I don't remember. So, let me look. Yes, chapter 5. Okay. My brain only partially glitched. But if you remember in the first half of chapter 5, Tia admitted to Dr. Kenny that she is feeling a great deal of love for her partner, and they discussed the various types of love according to Greek and Latin scholars, which is eros, philios, and agape, which is defined. I actually prefer Lars, the other brain ship's definition, but I guess the classical definition would be eros is a sexual love, agape is a religious love, and philios is like brotherly love. And Lars's definition was love involving the body, love involving the mind, and love involving the soul, which I like his definition better. That could just be me. And then Tia, the second portion that I read from that chapter, the latter half, was all about Tia's money-making schemes, which seem really clever to me. And they've always seemed very clever to me from the very first time I read it. I was like, oh, that's a really good idea for making money. We'll see if it works for her. And we ended the chapter, or the first half of the chapter, with Alex coming back from his spending spree and party never ends with old Braun friends, and asking Tia if she missed him. And that is where we left off. So with that recap out of the way, let's jump back into chapter 5, part 2 of The Ship Who Searched by Anne McCaffery and Mercedes Lackey. The comlink was live, and Alex was on his very best behavior, including a fresh and only marginally rumpled uniform. He sat quietly in his chair, the very picture of a somber academy graduate and responsible C.S. Braun. Tia reflected that it was just as well that she had bullied him into the uniform. The transmission was shared by Professor Barton Glasgow E. Verona Gra, head of the Institute, and a gray-haired, dark-tunicked man the professor identified as Central Systems Sector Administrator Joshua Ellett Rosen E. Senior, very high in administration, and just now very concerned about something, though he hid it well. Alex had snapped into a sort of seated attention the moment his face appeared on the screen. Alexander, Hypatia, we're going to be sending you a long file of stills and hollows, Professor Barton said. But for now, the object that you see on my desk is representative of our problem. The object in question was a perfectly lovely little vase. The style was distinctive, skewed, but with a very sensuousness, as if someone had fused Art Nouveau with Salvador Dali. It seemed, as nearly as Tia could tell from the transmission, to be made of multiple layers of opalescent glass or ceramic. It also had the patina that only something that has been buried for a very long time can achieve. Or something with a chemically faked patina. But would the professor have called them himself if he was worried about fake antiquities? Not likely. The only problem with the vase, if it was a genuine artifact, was that it did not match the style of any known artifact in any of Tia's files. You know that smuggling and site robbing has always been a problem for us, Professor Barton continued. It's very frustrating to come onto a site and find that it's already been looted, but this is doubly frustrating. Because, as I'm sure that Hypatia has already realized, the style of this piece does not match that of any known civilization. A few weeks ago, hundreds of artifacts in this style flooded the black market, Senor said, smoothly picking up the talk. Analysis shows them to be quite ancient. This piece, for instance, was made sometime around when Ramses II was pharaoh. The professor was not wringing his hands, but his distress was obvious. There are hundreds of these objects, he blurted. Everything from cups to votive offerings, from jewelry to statuary. We not only don't know where they come from, but we don't know anything about the people who made them. Most of them are not as well preserved as this one, of course, Signor continued, sitting with that incredible stillness that only a professional politician or actor can achieve. But, he went on, besides being incredibly valuable, and not incidentally funneling money into the criminal subculture, there is something else rather distressing associated with these artifacts. Tia knew what it had to be as soon as the words came out of the man's mouth. Plague. Plague, he said solemnly. So far, this has not been a fatal disease, at least not to the folk who bought the trinkets. They have private physicians and in-house medical, obviously. High families, Tia thought. So the high families are mixed up in this. The objects aren't really dangerous, not once they've been through a proper decontamination, the professor said. But whoever is digging these things up isn't even bothering with a run under a UV gun. He's just cleaning them up. Tia winced inwardly, and she saw Alex wince. To tell an archaeologist that a smuggler had cleaned up an artifact was like telling a coin collector that their nephew Joey had gotten out a wire brush and shined up his collection. Cleaning them up, putting them in cases, and then they just sell them. Professor Barton sighed. I have no idea why their helpers aren't coming down with this. Maybe they're immune, but whatever the reason, the ones who receive these pieces, well, they're coming down with it. And they're not happy about it, and they want something done. The professor's expression told Tia more than his words did. The high families who had bought these artifacts that they must have known were smuggled and possibly stolen, well, some members of their circle had gotten sick. And because the Institute was the official organization in charge of relics, they expected the Institute to find the smuggler and deal with them. Not, thought Tia, that any of them would tell us how and where they found out about the treasures, nor will they ever admit that they know that they're gray market, if not black. And if they would stop buying smuggled artifacts, well, then they wouldn't get sick. But none of that meant anything. Not when it came to the high families, of course. They were too wealthy and too powerful to ever find themselves dealing with such simple concepts like cause and effect. Except every once in a great while, thought Tia. Like now, when it rises up and bites them. In spite of the threat of disease associated with these pieces, they're still in high demand, Signor said. Tia thought to herself, because someone in the high families spread the word that you better run the thing through decom after you buy it so you can have your pretty without the penalty. But there was something wrong with this story. Something that didn't quite fit. She just couldn't figure out what it was. Meanwhile, the transmission continued. But I don't have to tell either of you how dangerous it is to have these things out there, Professor Barton told them. It's fairly obvious that the smugglers are not taking even the barest of precautions with them. It becomes increasingly likely with every piece sold at a high price that somebody will steal one, or find out where the source is, or take one into a disadvantaged area to sell it. A slum, you mean, thought Tia. Was he putting too much emphasis on this, she wondered. Tia decided to show that both she and her brawn were paying close attention. "I can see what could happen then, gentlemen," she said. "Disease spreads very quickly in areas like that, and what might not be dangerous for someone with means will kill the impoverished. And then," she thought to herself, "we'll have a full-scale epidemic and a panic on our hands." But he had to know how she felt about this. He knew who Tia actually was. There were not too many Hypatias in the world, and he had been the immediate boss of Poda and Brandon's supervisor. He had to know the story. He was probably betting on it. "Precisely, Hypatia," said Signor, eerily answering Tia's thoughts. I hope that you're not planning on using us as smuggler hunters," Alex said. "I could not pass as high families in a million years, so I couldn't be in on the purchasing end. And we're not allowed to be armed. I know that I don't want to take on the smuggling end without a locker filled with artillery." In other words, gentlemen, thought Tia, we ain't stupid, we ain't expendable, and we ain't going. But this was all sounding a little too pat, a little too contrived. If Signor told them that they weren't expected to catch the smugglers themselves... "No," said Signor soothingly, and a little too quickly. "No, we have some teams in the enforcement division going at both ends. However, it is entirely possible that the source for these artifacts is someone, or several someones, working on exploration or evaluation teams. Since the artifacts showed up in this sector first, it's illogical to assume that they originate here." Too smooth, thought Tia. Too pat. This is all a story, but why? "So, you want us to keep our eyes peeled when we make our deliveries?" said Alex. "You two are uniquely suited," Professor Barton said. "You both have backgrounds in archaeology. Hypatia, you know how digs work intimately. Once you get to know how to identify these artifacts, if you see a hint of them, shards or broken bits of jewelry, why, you'll know what they are and where they came from." "We could do that," Tia said carefully. "We could be a little snoopy, I think, without arousing suspicions." "Good. That's what we need." Professor Barton sounded quite relieved. "I suppose I don't need to add that there's a bonus in this for you." "I can live with a bonus," said Alex. The two VIPs signed off, and Alex turned immediately to Tia. "Did that sound as phony to you as it did to me?" he asked. "Well, the objects that they want are certainly real enough," Tia said, playing back her internal recording of the conversation and analyzing every word. "But whether they're really artifacts or not, that's another question. There is definitely more going on than they are willing to admit." Alex leaned back in his chair and he put his hands behind his head. "Are these financing espionage or insurrection?" he guessed. "Or maybe buying weapons?" Tia stopped her recording. There was something about the artifact that bothered her. She enhanced the picture and she threw it up on the screen. "What's wrong with this?" she demanded. Alex leaned in for a look. "Is that a hole bored in the base?" he said. "Bored in and then maybe patched over?" "Could be," said Tia, enhancing her picture again. "Does it seem to you that the base is awfully thick?" "Maybe," he said. "You know, we have only their word that these are alien artifacts. What if they're nothing of the sort?" The answer came to Tia so quickly that it brought its own fireworks display with it. "I've got it," she exclaimed. and quickly accessed the Institute library for a certain old news bite. She remembered this one from her own childhood, both for the fact that it had been an ingenious way to smuggle, and because her mother had caught her watching it, realized what the story was about, and shut it off, but not before Tia had gotten the gist of it. One of the Institute archaeologists had been subverted by a major drug smuggler who wanted a way to get his supply to Central. In another case, where there were small digs on the same planets as colonies, the archaeologist had himself become addicted to the mood-altering drug Paradise, and he had made himself quite open to blackmail. That blackmail had come from the supplier-producer themselves. Out there in the fringe, it was easy enough to hide his smuggled supplies in ordinary shipments of agri-goods, but the nearer that you got to civilization, the harder smuggling became. Publicly available transport was just out of the question. But there were other shipments going straight to the heart of civilization, shipments that were so innocent, so fragile, that they never saw a customs inspector. Things like artifacts. So, the drug dealer had molded his product in the likeness of pottery shards, and the archaeologist on site made sure that they got packed like any other artifact and shipped, though never cataloged. Once the shipment arrived at the Institute, a worker inside of the receiving area would set aside the crates that had a particular mark and leave them on the loading docks overnight, where they would of course disappear. But since they had never been cataloged, they were never missed. The only reason that the archaeologist in question had been caught was because an overzealous graduate student actually had cataloged the phony shards, and when they came up missing, the police became involved. Tia ran that old news clip for Alex, who watched it attentively. "What do you think?" she asked. "I think," he said, "that our friend in the dull striped tunic had a strangely physically fit look about him. The look that says police, at least to me. I think you're right, Tia. I think someone is trying the artifact switch again, except this time they're coming in on the black market." Tia did a quick access onto the net and began searching for a politician named Signor. She found one, but he did not match the man that she had seen on the transmission. The trick is probably that if someone sees a crate full of smuggled glassware, they don't think about drugs, Tia said, feeling very smug over her deduction and identification of Signor as a ringer. Of course, there was no way of knowing if her guess was right or wrong, but still. "The worst that's likely to happen to an artifact smuggler," she said, "is a fine and a slap on the wrist. They aren't taken very seriously, even though there is serious money in it, and the smugglers might have killed to get the artifacts." That's assuming that inspectors even find the artifacts. But where are we supposed to fit into all this? Alex said, running a hand through his hair. "Do they think we're going to find the guy?" "I think that they think that he's working with one of the small dig people again. By the way, Alex, you were absolutely right about Signor. Or, rather, the Signor that we saw is not the one on record." Another thought occurred to Tia. You know, their story might well be genuine. There's not a lot of room in jewelry to hide drugs, but whoever's doing this might have started smuggling the artifacts freelance, got tangled up with a crime syndicate, and now they're being forced to deal the fake drug-carrying artifacts along with real ones. "That makes sense," Tia said, "and it fits everything. Do we play along?" "Yes," Tia said, slowly. "But in a very limited sense. We are not trained in law enforcement, and we don't carry weapons. If we see something, we just report it and get the heck out. Sounds good to me, lady, Alex said, with relief. I'm not a coward, but I'm also not stupid. And I did not sign up with the B&B program to get ventilated by some low-down punk. If I wanted to do that, all I have to do is stroll in bad neighborhoods and flash some glitter. Tia, why did they come up with all that nonsense about plague? Partially to hook us in, I think, she said. They know that we were the team that got the zombie bug, and we would feel strongly about plague, and partially, I think, to keep us from touching the objects. If we don't mess with them, then we wouldn't find out about the drug link. Alex made a sound of disgust. You would think that they would trust us with the real story. I am half tempted to blow this whole thing off, just because they didn't. I won't, he said, but it's tempting. Alex began warming up the boards, prepping to take off. Tia opened a channel to traffic control, but while she did, she was silently wondering if there wasn't even more to the story than she had guessed. There was something bothering Alex, and as they continued on their rounds, he tried to put his finger on it. It was only after he replayed the recorded transmission of Professor Barton and the bogus senor that he figured out what it was. Tia had known Professor Barton was genuine without even checking, and Barton had said things that indicated he knew who Tia was. Alex had never really wondered about her background. He had always assumed that she was just like every other shell person he had ever met, popped into a shell at birth because of fatal birth defects, with parents who would rather forget that she had ever been born, who were just as pleased to have her as someone else's problem. What was it the professor had said, though? You both have archaeology backgrounds, and Hypatia, you know how digs work intimately? From everything that John Chernov had said, the Shell Person program was so learning intensive that there was no time for hobbies. A Shell Person only acquired hobbies after they got out in the real world and had leisure time for them. The Lab Schools program was so intensive that even play was scheduled, and games were choreographed, planned, and taught just like a class. There was no room for an interest in archaeology, and it was not on the normal course curriculum. The only way to know how digs work intimately was to work on them yourself, or to be the child of archaeologists who kept you on site with them. That was when it hit him. Something that Tia had said. The Cades met while they were recovering from Henderson's Cora. That type of information would not be the sort of thing someone who made a hobby of archaeology would know. Details of archaeologists' lives were of interest to only people that knew them. Under the cover of running a search on Escade Digs, he pulled up the information on personnel, backtracking to the last Escade dig that the Cades had worked on. And there it was. C-121. Active personnel, Braden Martins Cade, Poda Andropoulos Cade. Dependent, Hypatia Cade. Age 7. Hypatia Cade evacuated to the station hospital Pride of Albion by Metaservice AI drone. Victim of some unknown disease. Braden and Poda put in isolation. Hypatia never heard from again. Perhaps she died, but that wasn't likely. There couldn't be very many girls named Hypatia in the galaxy. The odds of 2 of them being evacuated to the same hospital ship were tiny. The odds that Tia's best friend, being Dr. Kenneth Una Song, who was the chief of neurology and neurosurgery, who would have been the very same doctor in charge of the other Tia's case? That was so minuscule, he wasn't even prepared to calculate those odds. Alex replaced the file, and he logged off the boards, feeling as though he had been hit in the back of the head with a board. Oh, spirits of space, he thought. When she took me as a brawn, I made a toast to our partnership. May it be as long and fruitful as the Cades. Oh, Comet. I'm surprised she didn't bounce me out of the airlock right then. Tia, he said, carefully into the cabin. I'd like to apologize. So you found me out, did you? To his surprise and profound relief, Tia sounded amused. Yes, I am Hypatia Cade. I thought about telling you, but then I was afraid that you would feel badly about verbally falling over your feet. You do realize, Alex, that you can't access any data without me being aware of it, right? Oh, heck. I thought I was being sneaky. Alex managed a weak grin. I thought that I had been covering my tracks well enough that you wouldn't notice. I'm sorry if it made you feel bad. Oh, Alex, it would have only been tacky and tasteless or stupid and insensitive if you had done it on purpose. Tia laughed. He had really come to like her laugh. It was a deep, rich one. He often told her B&B jokes just so he could hear her laugh. It's neither, Tia said. It's just one of those things. I assume, though, that you're curious now? What do you want to know about me? Everything, he said. And then he blushed. Unless you'd rather not talk about it. Alex, I don't mind at all. I had a happy childhood, and frankly, it will be a lot more comfortable being able to talk about Mom and Dad, or with Mom and Dad, without trying to hide it from you. This time, instead of laughing, she giggled. Sometimes I felt like I was trying to hide a secret lover in reverse. So, you stay in contact with your parents? Alex was fascinated. This went against everything that he had been taught about shell people, either at the academy or directly from John Chernoff. Shell people didn't have families. Their supervisors and their classmates were their families. Of course I stay in contact with them. I'm their biggest fan, if archaeologists can have fans. Her center screen lit up. It was a shot of Poda and Braden, proudly displaying an ornate set of body armor. Here's something from their last letter. They just uncovered the armory, and what they found is going to set the scholastic world on its collective ears. Those are iron plates that you see on Bronze Age armor. No. He stared in fascination, and not just at the armor. At Poda and Braden, smiling and waving like any other parents for their child. Poda pointed to something on the armor, while Braden's mouth was moving, explaining something. Tia had the sound off, and the definition wasn't good enough for Alex to lip read. That's not my interest, though. Not really, Tia said. I was telling you the truth. I am after the SK homeworld, but I want it because I want to find the bug that got me. The two side screens came up, both with old pictures. Before you ask, Alex, there I am. The one on the right is my 7th birthday party, and the one on the left, as you can see, is a picture of me with Theodore Bear and Mariah's Baron, Thomas. Ted was a present from both of them. Tia paused for a moment. Yeah, I just checked. That is the last good picture ever taken of me. The rest are all in the hospital, and I would not inflict them on anyone except a neurologist. Alex studied the pictures, each of which showed the same bright-eyed elfin child, an incredibly pretty child, dark-haired, blue-eyed, with a thin, delicate face and a smile that wouldn't stop. How did you get into the Shell Person program? He asked. I thought they didn't take anyone older than 1. They didn't. Not back then. That was Dr. Kenny's doing. Him and Lars, the system manager for the hospital. They were convinced that I was flexible enough to make the transition, and since I was intelligent enough to understand what happened to me and everything it meant, which was, she said, complete life support, 0 mobility. Alex shuddered. I can see why you wouldn't want that happening to anyone else ever again. Precisely. Tia blanked the screens before he had a chance to look at the pictures further. After I turned out so well, lab schools started considering older children on a case-by-case basis. They've taken 3 so far, but none as old as me. Well, my lady, as remarkable as you are now, you must have been just as remarkable as a child, Alex said, meaning every word. Flatterer, she told him, but she sounded pleased. I mean it, he said. I interviewed with 2 other ships, you know. Neither of them had your personality. I was looking for someone like John Chernov, and they were like AI drones. You've mentioned John before, Tia said. What does he have to do with this? Didn't I tell you? Then he hit himself in the forehead with his hand. Decomet, I didn't ever tell you. John is a shell person too. He was the supervisor and systems manager on the research station where my parents worked. Oh, said Tia. So that's why? Why what? Why you treat me like you do. Facing my column, asking permission to come aboard, asking me what kind of music I want. Oh, you bet, he told her. John made darn good and sure that I had good softshell manners before he let me go off to the academy. He would verbally blister my hide if I ever forgot that you were here, and that you are the part of the team that can't go off to your own cabin to be alone. Tell me about him, Tia said. Alex had to think hard to remember the first time he had ever started talking to John. I think I first realized that he was around when I was 2, maybe 3. My folks were chemex at one of the Lily Bar research stations. There weren't a lot of kids around at the time because it was a new station and most of the personnel were unattached. There weren't a lot of facilities for kids, and I guess what must have happened was that John volunteered to kind of babysit when my parents were at work. It wasn't all that hard. Basically, all he had to do was make sure that the door to my room stayed locked, except when he sent servos in to feed me and things. But I guess I kind of fascinated him. And he started talking to me, telling me stories, and then directing the servos to play with me. Alex laughed. For a while, my parents thought I was going through the invisible friend stage. Then they got worried because I didn't grow out of it, and they were about to send me off to a head shrinker, and that was when John interrupted while they were trying to make the appointment and told them that he was my invisible friend. Tia laughed. You already knew that Mariah and I have known each other for a long time. Well, she was the CS ship that always serviced my parents' digs, and that was how I got to know her. It gets you used to having a friend that you can't see but you can talk to, said Alex. Well, once I started preschool, John lost interest for a while until I started learning to play chess. He is quite the player himself, and when he saw that I was beating the computer regularly, he remembered who I was and he stepped in. Right in the middle of a game. I was winning until he took over. Alex still sounded a bit aggravated about that. What can I say? Tia asked. I suppose that I shouldn't complain. He became my best friend. He was the one that encouraged my interest in archaeology, and when it became obvious that my parents weren't going to be able to afford all of the courses that would take, he helped get me into the academy. Did you know that a recommendation from a shell person counts for twice as much as a recommendation from anybody but a PTA and up? No. Tia sounded surprised. Evidently they trust our judgment. Well, you've heard John's messages. He's probably as pleased with how things turned out as I am. He spread his hands and shrugged. And that's all there is to know about me. Hardly, said Tia, but it does clear up a few mysteries. When Alex hit his bunk that night, he found that he was having a hard time sleeping. He had always thought of Tia as a person, but now he had a face to go with the name. John Chernoff had shown him once what he would have looked like if he could have survived outside of his shell. Alex had known that it was going to be hideous, and he had managed not to shudder or turn away, but it had taken an act of will. After that, it had just been easier not to put a face to the voice. There were completely non-human races that looked more human than poor John. But Tia? Tia had been a pretty child. She would have grown up into a stunning adult. Shoot, inside that shell, she probably is a stunning adult. A stunning, lifeless adult. Like a puppet with no strings, a sex companion android without hookups. Alex had no desire to crack her column. He was not the sort to be attracted by anything lifeless. Feely porn had given him the creeps, and his one adolescent try with a sex droid had sent him away feeling dirty and used. But it made the tragedy of what happened to Tia all the more poignant. John's defects were such that it was a relief for everyone that he was in a shell, but Tia? But then she was happy. She was as happy as any of his classmates in the academy, so where was the tragedy? Only in his mind. Only in his mind. And that is how that chapter ends. So, yeah, now everybody knows everybody's backstory. And they are supposed to be on the lookout for artifacts that could be causing plague, but Tia seems to think is more likely to be smuggling drugs. You gotta admit, that's a great way to smuggle stuff, though. In artifacts, that would probably work. Anyway, here we are again, almost 45 minutes of reading. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. And, yeah, I hope you're enjoying this story as much as I am. I really do like this one. So, as always, thank you so much for listening. I would show you this kitty cat, but she is sound asleep. She's so cute. Jezebel sleeps with her hands over her face, and it is seriously one of the cutest things ever. I might be able to show you. Hang on here. Let's see. There she is, hiding her face. It's very cute. Let's see if I can activate her. Oh no, there we go. Hello there, Jezebel. Hi, Jezebel. Anyway, and you got to see my open drawer and mess. Oh well, I'm human. Anyway, thank you as always for listening. I really appreciate it. Leave me a thumbs up if you don't mind. It always makes me smile. Consider subscribing if you're not already subscribed. Remember, I go live every Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern and play video games. I also do other silly things, and yeah, that's about it. You can follow me on Instagram if you want to. I post pictures from time to time. You can follow me on Twitter, although I'm really boring on Twitter. Like, I legit do nothing except like other people's posts and every now and then post a picture. And other than that, hopefully I can see you around here. Have a good one.